Welcome to Happiness in Old Age, a place to preserve unforgettable memories of a difficult but resilient wartime. Here, we will review historical stories, wartime memories, from the lives of soldiers on the battlefield to the people in the rear. The years of evacuation, the cassava mixed meals, the letters sent to the battlefield, all will be told through emotional videos. I was born and raised in a peaceful countryside. Before the war, life here was like any other countryside. During the day, adults plowed the fields, children herded buffaloes and fished, and in the evening, the whole neighborhood gathered around the fire, telling stories to each other. But then, those peaceful days did not last long. I still remember that afternoon clearly. The sky was blue, a few white clouds drifting lazily. I was flying kites with my friends in the field when suddenly I heard a loud explosion from afar. The ground shook, birds flew away. From afar, a column of black smoke rose high. We ran back to the village in panic. While running, we heard the sound of planes roaring in the sky. The adults in the village screamed, calling each other to run to the shelter. At that time, I did not understand what was happening. I just held on to my mother's hand and ran. After the first wave of bombings, the whole village was in a state of panic and anxiety. That night, I heard my father talking to the neighbors. They said that the war had really come. News came that the enemy was attacking many places, some neighboring villages were leveled by bombs, and many people had died. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were red, but she was trying to hold back her tears, and the following days, my whole village began to prepare to evacuate. Adults carried their belongings, children carried them on their backs, all of them flocked into the forest. My father and many young men in the village volunteered to go to the battlefield. I remember the morning when my father left. My mother forced a smile and told him, "You have to take care of your health when you go to war, okay? Remember to come back to me and my mother one day." My father just smiled and patted my head. "Stay home and be good. Take care of your mother for me, okay?" Having said that, my father put on his backpack and walked away. I stood next to my mother and watched until my father's figure gradually disappeared. At that time, I did not understand that it might be a long time, or forever, before I would see my father again. During the days living in the forest, we had to stay in small, cramped earthen shelters. During the day, my mother and everyone else went out to carry rice and supplies for the soldiers, and at night, we would cook in silence, for fear of being discovered by enemy planes. There were nights when we were sleeping and the alarm siren would blare loudly. The whole neighborhood hurriedly hugged each other and ran down to the shelter. In the sky, the sound of planes roared, then bombs exploded loudly. The ground shook repeatedly, dust filled the air, and sometimes the shelter collapsed. Children cried out in fear, but adults could only cover their mouths, for fear of being discovered by the enemy. Once, an enemy plane dropped a bomb right near where we were hiding. When I ran outside, I saw Uncle Two's small house burned down. He was lying on the ground, covered in blood. My mother quickly carried me away, but that image haunted me forever. Then one day, the news of victory resounded everywhere. People rushed out of the bunker, hugging each other and crying. Those who had relatives in the army were anxiously waiting for the day of reunion. But then, not everyone could return. My mother waited for my father for many months after the country was at peace. Every day, my mother still went to the village entrance, looking towards the field where my father had left. But then, my mother only received a letter and a certificate of merit from the fatherland. I grew up in peacetime, but the memories of the war days still remain. I remember the sound of bombs, the days hiding in the bunker, and my mother's tears when she held the death notice. And I understand that those losses were not only for my family, but for countless other families in this land. ChatGPT said, "Here's another wartime story, Mother on the Bomb Field, about the sacrifice and courage of women in the rear." During the war years, not only the soldiers on the battlefield, but also many mothers and wives in the rear were fighting in their own way. My mother was one of them, a simple but surprisingly resilient woman, fields without bombs. Before the war broke out, my village was just a peaceful countryside, surrounded by rice fields. My mother, like many other women, spent all day working in the fields, taking care of her children, waiting for her husband to return from the fields. When the rice was ripe, my mother carried bundles of rice to dry in the yard, the fragrant smell of straw mixed with the afternoon wind. My friends and I ran around the fields, playing in the dirt, catching grasshoppers. Those days, although poor, were so happy. But then the war came, wiping out that peace. Bomb fields under fire. Since the enemy arrived, the fields were no longer a peaceful place. Enemy planes circled the sky, dropping bombs on any place suspected of having soldiers or laborers. Harvesting rice became escapes. People were no longer afraid of the sun or rain, but only of the roaring sound of planes. One day, I followed my mother to the fields to harvest rice. The sky was clear and unusually quiet. But then, the sound of a plane rang out. Someone shouted, "Plane! Run!" Everyone abandoned their rice, rushed into the ditches, into the bamboo groves, or anywhere they could hide. I trembled and hid behind my mother, my heart pounding. The bomb exploded loudly. The whole field shook. Dust flew everywhere. I could only hug my mother tightly, tears streaming down my face. When the bomb stopped, everyone gradually crawled out of their hiding places. I looked around. The familiar field was now filled with bomb craters, rice was lying flat, and a few scorched conical hats were flying around. In the distance, someone was lying motionless. One day, my mother said, "Stay home and look after your younger sibling. I will go and carry rice for the soldiers." I jumped up and down. "You go with me. I am not afraid." My mother patted my head and smiled gently. "I will go and come back. Stay home and be good, understand?" But that time, my mother did not come back. That night, the whole village was in chaos. People said that the porters were ambushed by enemy planes in the middle of the road. Everyone ran to the village entrance to wait for news. I held my younger brother's hand, trying to keep my eyes open to see my mother among the people returning. But I could not see her. It was not until the next day that people found my mother. She was lying on the trail, still clutching a bag of rice. People said that before the bomb fell, my mother shouted, "Run! Run now!" But Mom didn't have time to run anymore. I couldn't cry. I just stood there, looking at Mom lying still, as if sleeping. Mom's hands were rough from working, her clothes were still covered in mud. I just wanted to shake Mom awake, tell her not to sleep anymore. She promised she would come back. But Mom didn't wake up anymore. After the war, I grew up and understood that my mother was not just a farmer, but a soldier in her own way. She did not hold a gun, but sacrificed herself so that the soldiers out there would have enough food to fight. Now, every time I pass that field, I miss my mother. I see her silhouette bending over to harvest rice, see her smile in the afternoon sun, and hear her voice calling, "Run, my child." Although the war has gone far away, those memories will never disappear. Here is a story, The Returning Soldier, about a soldier who returns to his homeland after the war with unforgettable losses and memories. The war ended and the country entered a period of peace. The surviving soldiers returned to their hometowns one by one, but not everyone found what they had left behind. I had waited for the day to return for many years, but when I set foot in my village, I understood that there were things that could never be the same again. After many years of fighting, I wore a worn-out military uniform, a heavy backpack, but my heart was light because I had survived. On the dirt road leading back to the village, I saw the green rice fields again, the thatched roofs, still the image of my homeland, but my heart sank. I was no longer the 18-year-old boy who left the village to go to war. The years on the battlefield had taken away so many things: my youth, my friends, a part of my body, and perhaps a part of my soul too. At the village gate, I stopped for a long time. I had dreamed of this day of return many times in my sleep in the deep forest, but now I suddenly felt afraid. I was afraid to enter the village, afraid that no one would be waiting for me, afraid of the changes that I had not prepared for. I walked through the familiar dirt road where I used to cycle on the afternoons of my childhood. But instead of the familiar call, I only saw strangers looking at me curiously. My village had changed. Many old houses had been destroyed by bombs, replaced by new houses hastily built from bamboo. I walked on until I reached the gate of my house. The old bamboo gate was still there, but my house was no longer there. A small hut was built temporarily on the old house's foundation. I felt my heart tighten. I called out tremblingly, "Mom." No one answered. An old lady from the house next door heard the noise and ran out, looked at me in shock, then burst into tears. "Oh my God, Hoa! Are you still alive?" I recognized her as Mrs. Land, my mother's old neighbor. I quickly asked, "Where is your mother?" Mrs. Land looked at me, tears rolling down her face. She didn't say anything, just held my hand tightly and pulled me into the house. On the small altar, amidst the billowing incense smoke, I saw my mother's photo. I was speechless. Mrs. Land choked up. "Your mother passed away 3 years ago. She waited for you forever, but she couldn't make it." I collapsed. I had survived and returned, but the person I wanted to see the most was no longer there. I stayed in the village, living in the small hut where my mother lived during her last years. On long nights, I sat by her altar, looking at her portrait, tears silently falling. I remembered the times my mother saw me off at the village entrance, the meal she cooked before I left. Every morning, I went to the field where my mother used to work. I sat for a long time, closed my eyes and imagined that I was still the boy I used to be, still hearing my mother calling me to come home for dinner. The war ended, but it never really left. It left scars in the hearts of the soldiers who returned, those who lost loved ones, and memories that could never be erased. I returned, but not completely. In the days after returning, I lived quietly in my mother's small house. Every day, I went to the fields, walked along the old roads, sat under the banyan tree at the village entrance where the children used to gather to play. But now, the newly grown children no longer recognized me, only looked at me like a stranger with sympathetic eyes. I understood that the village was still here, but what I used to have was no longer there. One day, Mrs. Land brought me some sweet potatoes, sat down next to me, and sighed. "Now that you're back, stay here, don't go anywhere else. Our village has lost so much." I could only nod, but my heart was heavy. At night, I often wake up with a start in my dreams. I dream of the battlefield, of fallen comrades, of bloodshed, of the rumbling sound of bombs. There are nights when I sit with my knees drawn up in front of my house, looking up at the starry sky, wondering, could it be that the dead are also looking down at me from somewhere? One day, I visited my parents' graves. The village's small cemetery was located on a hill, the wind was blowing, the treetops were swaying in the afternoon sun. I lit incense and whispered, "I'm home. Mom." I sat there for a long time, until I heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, I saw a woman with gray hair, but her eyes were still as gentle as ever. I was stunned. "Lon, is that you?" Lon was the girl I loved before I went to war. We promised each other that when the war ended, I would return, we would get married, and we would rebuild our lives together. But now, in front of me, Lon was no longer the young girl she used to be. I looked at her hands, on them were calluses from years of hardship. Lon smiled, her voice choked. "I thought you had." I nodded. "You're back, but there's no one waiting for you anymore." Both of us stood there, silent. I knew Lon had a family. The day I went to war, she waited for me, but there was no news about me. When the village lost so many people, she had to choose a new path for herself. I didn't blame her, I just felt empty inside. "Live well," Lon said, then turned and walked away. I stood there for a long time, watching her figure disappear into the late afternoon. In the following months, I tried to find a job. I helped the villagers plow the fields, repaired the damaged roads, and helped rebuild the wooden bridge across the stream. I began to feel like I belonged here again. Although I no longer had a family, no loved ones, I still had my homeland. I realized that my homeland was not just my old memories, but also what I could build from now on. One day, while I was building a bank for the irrigation ditch leading to the field, I saw a boy of about 10 years old standing and watching me intently. When I looked up, he shyly asked, "Uncle, are you a soldier?" I nodded. The boy suddenly shouted, "Uncle, tell me a story about the war." I burst out laughing. For the first time in many years, I laughed for real. "Okay, come here, tell me." The boy sat down next to me, his eyes wide with excitement. And I began to tell, not only about the war, but also about my comrades, about the sacrifices, and about the unfulfilled dreams that soldiers like me had carried with us throughout our lives. I understood that, even though the war was over, the memories were still there. But I could choose to preserve them, not through pain, but through stories, through lessons, so that future generations would not have to witness what I had seen. As the years passed, I was no longer the soldier who returned quietly. I became a part of this village, helping those around me, and telling stories that I thought I would take to the grave. Every morning, I went out to the fields, took a deep breath, to feel the smell of new rice, the smell of life. I lost many things in the war. But I still had the most precious thing, the opportunity to live, to love, and to build a better tomorrow.